The strange daily habits of ancient Romans, how they really lived. Imagine waking up nearly 2,000 years ago in the greatest city the world had ever seen. The sun has not yet risen above the hills surrounding Rome, but the city is already awake. Somewhere in the darkness, a baker is feeding wood into a blazing oven. The smell of fresh bread drifts through narrow streets paved with worn stone. Water splashes as slaves carry heavy buckets from public fountains. Donkeys pull carts loaded with vegetables, wine, marble, and timber, their iron-shod hooves striking the road with a rhythm heard every morning across the city. From an upper window, someone empties yesterday's dirty water into the street below. A merchant lifts the wooden shutters of his small shop. A soldier finishes his night watch. The first customers gather outside a bakery, while in a luxurious villa on the Palatine Hill, servants quietly prepare for another day serving one of Rome's wealthiest families. This is not the Rome of grand triumphs or famous battles. This is the Rome that millions of ordinary people called home. When most people think of ancient Rome, they imagine gladiators fighting to the death, emperors wearing golden crowns, or mighty legions conquering distant lands. Yet those spectacular moments represented only a tiny fraction of Roman life. The real Roman Empire was built by ordinary mornings. By craftsmen opening their workshops before sunrise. By mothers preparing breakfast. By teachers waiting for noisy children. By merchants arguing over prices. By laborers carrying stone beneath the scorching Mediterranean sun. By slaves performing thousands of invisible tasks that kept one of history's greatest civilizations running every single day. For the average Roman, daily life was filled with routines that would seem both familiar and astonishing to us today. They brushed their teeth, but not quite the way we do. They visited enormous public bathhouses almost every day. They loved fast food centuries before modern restaurants existed. They spent hours gossiping in public squares. They believed their homes were protected by invisible household spirits. They wore clothing that immediately revealed their social status. They feared bad omens from birds flying overhead. And some of their strangest habits involved ingredients that most modern people would never willingly touch. To truly understand ancient Rome, we must look beyond the emperors and generals. We must walk through its streets. We must smell its markets. We must hear its endless noise. We must live as the Romans lived. Because the empire was not only built by Caesar or Augustus. It was built by millions of ordinary people following extraordinary routines. And those routines reveal more about Rome than any battlefield ever could. Rome never truly slept. At its height, Rome was unlike any city on earth. By the 2nd century AD, more than 1 million people may have lived within the city itself, making it the largest urban center in Europe for many centuries. Crowded apartment blocks rose several stories into the sky. Monumental temples overlooked busy forums. Hundreds of shops lined narrow streets where nearly every available space was used. Life here was loud. Constantly loud. The sounds never stopped. Metalworkers hammered bronze. Stonecutters shaped marble. Animals brayed. Children shouted. Merchants advertised their goods at full volume. Wheels rattled across uneven paving stones. Public speakers gathered crowds. Construction projects echoed throughout entire neighborhoods. Even at night, Rome remained restless. Although heavy wagons were often restricted during daylight hours to reduce congestion, many deliveries happened after sunset. The result was that while the wealthy attempted to sleep inside spacious homes, the rumble of carts carrying food, marble, and supplies continued through much of the night. For many Romans, uninterrupted silence simply did not exist. In fact, the Roman poet Juvenal once joked that only the extremely wealthy could ever hope to enjoy peaceful sleep. Everyone else lived surrounded by noise. Rising with the sun. Without electricity, smartphones, or alarm clocks, daylight controlled almost every aspect of Roman life. Most people woke shortly before sunrise. There was little reason to remain in bed. Artificial lighting existed, but oil lamps were expensive to operate continuously and produced only dim, smoky light. Every extra hour spent awake after sunset meant burning valuable olive oil. Sunrise meant work. Shops opened early. Markets became crowded. Government offices began receiving visitors. Construction crews gathered. Farmers headed into surrounding fields. Children prepared for school. The earlier someone started, the cooler the morning remained before the intense Mediterranean heat arrived. Summer afternoons in central Italy could become exhausting, especially for laborers working outdoors. Beginning work early was not simply a habit, it was a necessity. Two completely different mornings. Not every Roman experienced the same sunrise. The difference between rich and poor could be enormous. A wealthy senator might awaken inside a magnificent villa decorated with marble floors, painted walls, fountains, and lush interior gardens. Servants would already be awake. One slave prepared clothing. Another brought fresh water for washing. A cook organized breakfast. A secretary arranged documents for the day's business. Everything was carefully managed before the master even left his bedroom. The owner rarely performed ordinary household tasks. That was what slaves were for. A rich Roman household could contain dozens or even hundreds of enslaved people, each assigned a highly specific role. Some cared for children. Others maintained gardens. Some handled finances. Others prepared food. Some even specialized in dressing their master each morning. Meanwhile, only a short walk away, another Roman family experienced a completely different reality. They lived inside an insula, a crowded apartment building. Life inside the insula. Most Romans did not live in luxurious villas. They lived in apartment blocks that could rise 5 or even 6 stories high. These buildings filled much of the city. The higher someone lived, the poorer they usually were. Ground floor apartments were larger and more valuable because they were easier to access and often connected to shops. Upper floors were smaller, hotter during summer, colder during winter, and far more dangerous. Many buildings were constructed quickly using cheap materials. Wooden beams weakened over time. Walls cracked. Roofs leaked. Fires spread easily. Collapses were common enough that Roman writers frequently complained about unsafe housing. The poet Martial joked that tenants often worried more about their ceilings falling than about anything happening outside. Families squeezed into tiny rooms. Privacy barely existed. Children slept beside parents. Cooking happened in cramped spaces. Smoke filled the air. Neighbors argued through paper-thin walls. Every sound traveled. Yet these apartment buildings formed the beating heart of Rome. Millions lived, laughed, argued, celebrated, mourned, and raised families within them. The first task of every morning. One of the earliest jobs each morning involved collecting water. Unlike modern homes, very few Roman apartments had running water. Instead, people walked to public fountains supplied by magnificent aqueducts that carried fresh water from distant mountains. Rome's aqueduct system remains one of history's greatest engineering achievements. Fresh water flowed continuously into fountains scattered throughout the city. People arrived carrying clay jars, bronze containers, or wooden buckets. Children often helped. Slaves performed the task for wealthy households. Conversations naturally formed while waiting. Neighbors exchanged news. Rumors spread quickly. Political gossip traveled from fountain to fountain long before newspapers ever existed. For many Romans, fetching water was not merely a chore. It was part of daily social life. Household gods before breakfast. Before eating, many Roman families paused for a brief religious ritual. Inside countless homes stood a small household shrine known as a lararium. Here lived the Lares and Penates, the protective spirits believed to guard the family and the home. Each morning, family members might light a small lamp, offer wine, bread, flowers, incense, or simply whisper a short prayer asking for protection during the day ahead. Religion in Rome was deeply woven into everyday routines. People did not reserve faith only for temples. The divine existed inside the household itself. A successful business deal. A healthy child. A safe journey. A good harvest. Romans believed all of these depended partly on maintaining good relationships with the gods. Even ordinary mornings therefore began with a reminder that unseen forces were believed to influence every aspect of life. As the first sunlight finally reached the rooftops of Rome, the streets became even busier. Bakers sold warm loaves to hungry workers, children hurried toward their lessons, senators prepared for political debates, and merchants arranged colorful displays of fruit, pottery, cloth, and spices. But before most Romans faced the long day ahead, there was one important ritual still waiting. Breakfast. And although it was usually simple, what the Romans chose to eat, and how they ate it, reveals even more surprising habits about everyday life in the greatest empire of the ancient world. Food, drink, and the surprising dining habits of ancient Rome. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the streets long before the city reached its busiest hours. For many Romans, breakfast was not a leisurely family gathering around a large table. There were no pancakes stacked with syrup, no steaming cups of coffee, and certainly no refrigerators filled with choices. Food was simple. Practical. Fast. Life moved quickly in Rome, and most people could not afford to spend hours preparing elaborate morning meals. Yet behind these ordinary breakfasts existed one of the most fascinating food cultures in history, a cuisine that connected every corner of the Roman Empire, from the olive groves of Hispania to the wheat fields of Egypt and the vineyards of Gaul. To understand the Romans, you must understand what they ate. Because every meal reflected not only personal taste but wealth, status, religion, and even politics. Breakfast, a modest beginning. The Romans called breakfast ientaculum. For most people, it was the smallest meal of the day. A laborer preparing for hours of physical work needed enough food to keep going, but time was limited. The workday began early, and employers expected workers to arrive shortly after sunrise. A typical breakfast often consisted of little more than a piece of bread. Sometimes the bread was dipped into wine mixed with water. Other mornings it might be eaten with olives, soft cheese, or a handful of dried figs. If the family owned chickens, boiled eggs could be added. Fresh fruit appeared when it was in season. Children often ate the same foods as adults, though wealthier families occasionally provided sweeter treats flavored with honey. Honey was one of the few natural sweeteners available throughout the empire. Sugar, as we know it today, was virtually unknown in Roman kitchens. Instead, honey flavored everything from desserts to sauces. For the wealthy, breakfast could include fresh fruit imported from distant provinces, delicate pastries, or even leftover meat from the previous night's feast. But such luxury was rare. Most Romans began their day with simple foods that were inexpensive, filling, and easy to prepare. Bread, the foundation of Roman life. If one food defined ancient Rome, it was bread. Bread was everywhere. Rich or poor, nearly everyone depended on it. The city itself relied upon an enormous grain supply that arrived daily from across the Mediterranean. Egypt became one of Rome's most valuable provinces largely because its fertile Nile Valley produced vast quantities of wheat. Massive grain ships crossed the sea every year to feed the growing capital. Without them, Rome could not survive. The Roman government understood this perfectly. Keeping bread affordable became a political necessity. Emperors knew that hungry citizens were dangerous citizens. Public grain distributions eventually became one of the empire's most famous social programs. Thousands of poorer Romans regularly received subsidized grain, allowing them to bake bread at home or purchase it from local bakeries. Walking through Rome early in the morning, one would pass countless bakeries with enormous stone ovens glowing from the night's fire. Workers kneaded dough before sunrise. The scent drifted through entire neighborhoods. Some loaves were plain. Others contained herbs, poppy seeds, or olive oil. Many bakeries even stamped their bread with unique markings, making it easy to identify where each loaf had been baked. Remarkably, archaeologists have recovered carbonized loaves from Pompeii, preserved beneath volcanic ash since the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79. These ancient loaves still display the deep cuts that divided them into equal sections, allowing families to break them apart with ease. Looking at them today feels strangely familiar. Despite nearly 2,000 years passing, a Roman loaf still looks unmistakably like bread. Lunch on the move. By midday, Rome had become a sea of movement. Merchants shouted across crowded markets. Builders raised new temples. Lawyers argued in the forum. Messengers hurried through narrow streets carrying official orders. Most people had little time for a large midday meal. Instead, they ate prandium. Lunch was usually quick. Many workers simply carried food with them. Bread again formed the foundation. Cheese remained common. Olives provided flavor. Fruit added freshness. Cold meat from the previous evening sometimes appeared. Nothing was wasted. Food had value, and leftovers were expected to be eaten. Unlike modern office workers gathering around cafeterias, Romans often ate wherever they happened to be. Some stood outside their workshops. Others sat in shaded courtyards. Laborers rested briefly near construction sites. Travelers paused beside public fountains. The meal was less about comfort than necessity. Energy was needed for the long afternoon ahead. Ancient Rome's version of fast food. Surprisingly, many Romans rarely cooked at home. Especially the poor. Most apartments inside crowded insulae lacked proper kitchens. Cooking indoors carried enormous risks. Open flames easily caused devastating fires. Space was extremely limited. As a result, countless people purchased prepared food from small street restaurants. These establishments were known as thermopolia. Walking into one would feel strangely familiar to anyone visiting a modern cafe or takeaway restaurant. Large clay jars called dolia were built directly into stone counters. Inside them sat hot stews, vegetables, lentils, wine, beans, sausages, and cooked meats waiting for customers. Workers grabbed a quick meal before returning to their jobs. Travelers stopped for lunch. Laborers purchased inexpensive food they could never prepare safely at home. Archaeologists have uncovered dozens of these ancient food shops in Pompeii. Some still contain painted decorations advertising their meals. Others preserve cooking equipment exactly where it stood on the day Vesuvius buried the city. In many ways, these businesses represented the world's first true fast food restaurants. The concept feels surprisingly modern. Busy people buying hot meals prepared by someone else. Only the menu has changed. The meal that defined Roman life. As daylight began to fade, the most important meal finally arrived. Cena. Dinner. Unlike breakfast or lunch, dinner was not rushed. It was the social center of Roman life. Families gathered. Friends visited. Business relationships strengthened. Political alliances formed. Stories were told. Arguments erupted. For wealthy Romans especially, dinner became an opportunity to display status. A grand banquet could last for hours. Sometimes well into the night. Guests did not sit around a modern dining table. Instead, they reclined on cushioned couches surrounding a low central table. Eating while lying on one side symbolized refinement and wealth. Servants carried dish after dish into the dining room. Courses followed one another in carefully planned order. Exotic ingredients demonstrated the host's prosperity. Imported spices. Rare seafood. Expensive wines. Delicate desserts sweetened with honey. Every detail mattered. Hosting an unforgettable dinner increased one's reputation throughout Roman society. A taste of the empire. Rome ruled lands stretching across 3 continents. Its cuisine reflected that extraordinary reach. Olive oil arrived from Hispania. Wine came from Italy, Gaul, and Greece. Dates traveled from North Africa. Pepper reached Rome through long-distance trade routes connecting the empire with India. Fresh oysters came from coastal waters. Fish filled city markets every morning. Pork remained one of the most popular meats. Chicken appeared regularly. Game animals were served during luxurious feasts. Vegetables included cabbage, onions, garlic, beans, lentils, cucumbers, lettuce, and leeks. Fruit was abundant. Apples, pears, grapes, figs, pomegranates, peaches, plums. Many foods enjoyed by modern Italians would have seemed unfamiliar to the Romans. Tomatoes had not yet arrived from the Americas. Neither had potatoes, corn, chocolate, or coffee. Ancient Roman cuisine looked completely different from modern Italian cooking. Yet it possessed an incredible richness of flavors all its own. The sauce that was everywhere. No discussion of Roman food is complete without one remarkable ingredient. Garum. To modern ears, it sounds harmless. In reality, its production was enough to make many people lose their appetite. Garum was a fermented fish sauce. Small fish, or sometimes just their intestines, were layered with large amounts of salt inside massive containers. The mixture sat beneath the hot Mediterranean sun for weeks or even months. Slowly, natural fermentation transformed the fish into a thick, intensely flavored liquid. The smell during production was overwhelming. Ancient factories were often built outside cities because the odor became unbearable. Yet once completed, garum became one of the most valuable condiments in the Roman world. People poured it onto vegetables. Mixed it into soups. Added it to meat. Used it in sauces. Even desserts occasionally contained small amounts. It served a role similar to soy sauce or fish sauce in many modern Asian cuisines. Not everyone purchased the finest varieties. Cheap versions existed for ordinary citizens, while luxury garum could command astonishing prices and was transported across the empire as a prized delicacy. To a Roman palate, a meal without garum often seemed incomplete. Wine was safer than water. Perhaps the most famous Roman drink was wine. Adults drank it daily. Sometimes children did as well. But Roman wine was different from the wine served today. It was almost always diluted with water. Drinking undiluted wine was widely considered uncivilized and excessive. Some mixtures contained twice as much water as wine. Others included herbs, spices, honey, or even seawater to create unique flavors. At banquets, servants carefully mixed each cup according to the host's wishes. Although Rome possessed impressive aqueducts supplying clean water, contamination still occurred in some areas. Wine offered both flavor and relative safety when properly diluted. It became more than a beverage. It became a symbol of Roman civilization itself. To share wine was to participate in Roman culture. As darkness settled over the city, laughter echoed from wealthy villas while ordinary families finished modest meals inside crowded apartments. Oil lamps flickered. The smell of roasting meat drifted through elegant dining rooms. Street vendors sold the last of their food before closing for the night. But for many Romans, the evening was far from over. Tomorrow they would return to work, yet before another day began, many would visit one of the greatest achievements of Roman civilization, a place where rich and poor gathered together, where business deals were made, friendships formed, and daily life unfolded beneath towering marble halls. The Roman baths. And few places reveal the everyday habits of ancient Rome more vividly than these remarkable centers of social life. The Roman baths, hygiene, and beauty, how the Romans stayed clean. As the afternoon sun began to soften and the busiest hours of work came to an end, another daily ritual was just beginning. Across the city, thousands of Romans made their way toward one destination. Not the Forum. Not the temples. Not the markets. The baths. For many people today, a bath is a private moment, a few quiet minutes at home after a long day. For the Romans, bathing was almost the exact opposite. It was public. It was social. It was affordable. And it was one of the most important parts of everyday life. A Roman could discuss politics while soaking in warm water, negotiate a business agreement in a steam room, exercise in a courtyard, receive a massage, listen to poetry, meet old friends, or simply relax after a difficult day's work. The bathhouse was far more than a place to wash. It was the heart of Roman society. A city filled with baths. Rome contained hundreds of public bathhouses. Some were small neighborhood establishments. Others were so enormous that they resembled entire cities. The baths of Caracalla, completed in the early 3rd century AD, covered nearly 30 acres. Inside were towering marble halls, enormous swimming pools, gardens, libraries, exercise courts, fountains, shops, and rooms heated by some of the most advanced engineering ever created in the ancient world. At their busiest, thousands of visitors entered every single day. And these magnificent complexes were not reserved only for the rich. Admission was surprisingly inexpensive. Sometimes emperors even paid the entrance fee for everyone, allowing the entire city to bathe for free. Rich senators and ordinary laborers could find themselves walking through the same marble corridors. Although social classes remained visible, the baths brought together people from every corner of Roman society. The journey through the baths. Entering a Roman bathhouse was not as simple as stepping into warm water. There was a routine. Almost everyone followed it. First came the apoditerium, the changing room. Visitors removed their clothing and stored it in small niches along the walls. Those who could afford it often brought a slave whose job was to guard their belongings. Theft occasionally happened, especially in crowded bathhouses. The Roman poet Martial even joked about thieves who seemed to spend more time stealing clothes than bathing. Once changed, many Romans headed to the palestra. This was an open courtyard dedicated to exercise. People wrestled. Ran races. Practiced boxing. Lifted heavy stones. Threw balls to one another in surprisingly sophisticated games. For many Romans, sweating through exercise before bathing was considered healthy. Only after working up a sweat did the true bathing ritual begin. Heated floors, an engineering marvel. The first stop was often the tepidarium. This warm room allowed the body to adjust gradually. It was comfortable. Relaxing. Neither hot nor cold. From there, bathers entered the caldarium. This was the hottest room in the complex. Steam filled the air. Massive pools of heated water welcomed visitors. The heat came from an extraordinary invention called the hypocaust. Instead of heating water directly over a fire, Roman engineers built an empty space beneath the floors. Large furnaces burned continuously. Hot air traveled underneath the building before rising through hollow walls. The result was remarkably even heating. Walking through the caldarium, visitors stood above roaring fires without ever seeing them. The floors themselves became pleasantly warm beneath bare feet. Even today, historians continue to admire the sophistication of this system. Many modern underfloor heating designs operate on remarkably similar principles. The cold shock. After spending time in the intense heat, many Romans moved into the frigidarium. This room contained cold pools designed to refresh the body. The sudden plunge into cool water closed the pores and invigorated tired muscles. To modern visitors, it might sound uncomfortable. To the Romans, it completed the bathing experience. Many believed the contrast between hot and cold water improved health. Whether scientifically true or not, countless Romans ended every visit with this refreshing shock. They didn't use soap. Perhaps the biggest surprise for modern audiences is this. Most Romans did not clean themselves with soap. Soap certainly existed in some parts of Europe, but it was rarely used for bathing throughout much of Roman history. Instead, Romans relied on olive oil. Before entering the baths, or sometimes after exercising, a layer of olive oil was rubbed across the skin. The oil trapped dirt, sweat, and dust collected throughout the day. Then came one of the most recognizable tools of Roman hygiene. The strigil. A strigil was a curved metal scraper. Bath attendants gently drew it across the skin, removing the oil along with dirt and dead skin. To us, scraping the body with bronze or iron sounds unpleasant. To the Romans, it was perfectly normal. Many people considered the feeling deeply satisfying. Afterward, fresh oil might be applied again, often scented with herbs or flowers. The result left the skin surprisingly soft and clean. Some athletes became famous for producing so much sweat and oil during training that admirers supposedly purchased the scraped residue as a kind of medicinal product. Whether exaggerated or not, the story reveals just how differently Romans viewed hygiene. A place to socialize. Bathhouses were rarely quiet. Everywhere conversations filled the air. Businessmen negotiated contracts. Politicians sought support. Teachers met students. Old friends laughed together. Children splashed in shallow pools. Travelers exchanged stories from distant provinces. The philosopher Seneca once complained bitterly about the endless noise surrounding him while living above a bathhouse. He described the sounds of people exercising, shouting, arguing, jumping into pools, singing badly, and attendants calling out to customers. According to Seneca, finding peace inside Rome was nearly impossible. Yet most Romans loved the atmosphere. The baths represented community. People who had never met could begin conversations while relaxing in warm water. Ideas spread quickly. News traveled fast. Friendships formed naturally. For many citizens, visiting the baths became as important socially as physically. Looking good mattered. Romans cared deeply about appearance. A well-groomed individual reflected discipline, wealth, and respectability. Men generally preferred clean-shaven faces. Although fashions changed over the centuries, shaving became increasingly popular after the influence of Greek culture. Professional barbers operated throughout Rome. Small barber shops became neighborhood gathering places where customers not only received haircuts but also exchanged the latest gossip. Some men visited almost daily. The quality of one's haircut could influence first impressions in politics, business, and social life. A careless appearance suggested laziness. A polished appearance suggested self-control. Roman hairstyles. Women's hairstyles could become astonishingly elaborate. Among wealthy families, fashionable hairstyles changed almost as quickly as modern trends. Hair might be curled, braided, stacked into towering arrangements, decorated with gold pins, pearls, ribbons, or precious stones. Creating these styles often required hours of careful work. Specialized slaves known as ornatrices devoted themselves entirely to hairstyling. One misplaced curl might force them to begin again. Some Roman women even imported blonde hair from Northern Europe to create wigs. Others darkened their own hair using natural dyes. Fashion spread rapidly through the empire, especially after empresses introduced new styles. Coins bearing imperial portraits helped popularize these trends across thousands of miles. Makeup and perfume. Cosmetics were common. Women whitened their skin with special powders because pale complexions suggested wealth. Someone with pale skin likely spent less time performing manual labor beneath the sun. Cheeks received touches of red pigment. Eyes were outlined with dark powders. Perfume became another symbol of elegance. Rose, lavender, cinnamon, myrrh, frankincense. Expensive fragrances arrived from Egypt, Arabia, and India. Some wealthy Romans applied perfume not only to themselves but also to their clothing, furniture, and even banquet halls. Critics occasionally mocked excessive use of perfume, yet luxury remained fashionable. How did they brush their teeth? Roman writers often emphasized the importance of fresh breath. Without toothpaste, they relied upon creative alternatives. Tooth powders might contain crushed bones, charcoal, oyster shells, salt, herbs, or fine pumice stone. These abrasive mixtures helped remove stains. Small sticks served as early toothbrushes. Mouth rinses were also popular. One particularly infamous ingredient has fascinated historians for generations. Urine. Yes, human urine. Although unpleasant to modern ears, aged urine contains ammonia, an effective cleaning agent. Romans used it in several industries, including laundry. Some believed it also whitened teeth. Whether many people actually rinsed their mouths this way remains debated, but ancient authors clearly mention the practice. It serves as a reminder that Roman science often relied upon observation rather than modern chemistry. If something appeared to work, people continued using it. Public toilets. Few aspects of Roman daily life surprise modern audiences more than public toilets. Unlike today's private stalls, Roman latrines were communal. Long stone benches stretched across large rooms. Circular openings were cut into the seats. Visitors sat side by side with no partitions separating them. Conversation continued as naturally as anywhere else. Running water beneath the seats carried waste away continuously. Another shallow channel flowed along the front of the benches. Here users rinsed a communal sponge attached to a wooden stick. Known today as the tersorium, this sponge served the same purpose as toilet paper. After use, it was washed and left for the next visitor. To modern readers, the idea seems shocking. To Romans, it represented practical engineering. Privacy simply carried different meanings. Health, cleanliness, and status. Despite lacking modern medicine, many Roman hygiene practices were surprisingly advanced. Regular bathing reduced dirt and parasites. Running water improved sanitation. Aqueducts supplied enormous quantities of fresh water. Public fountains encouraged cleanliness. At the same time, misconceptions remained. Lead pipes may have introduced health risks in some situations. Medical knowledge was limited. Infections could become deadly. Even so, compared with many other ancient civilizations, Rome maintained an impressive commitment to public hygiene. Keeping clean was not merely about comfort. It reflected civilization itself. A Roman who cared for his appearance demonstrated discipline. A citizen who neglected hygiene risked appearing uncultured. As evening approached, bathhouses slowly emptied. Families returned home carrying the scent of olive oil and perfume. Oil lamps flickered to life across the city. From elegant villas came the sound of laughter during lavish banquets. From crowded apartment buildings came the cries of children, barking dogs, and neighbors talking through open windows. Tomorrow would bring another day of work. Another visit to the baths. Another cycle of routines repeated by millions across the empire. But before the sun rose again, Romans still had time for something they valued almost as much as work itself. Entertainment. From roaring chariot races and bloody gladiatorial games to theater, gambling, festivals, and lively evenings with friends, the Romans knew how to turn ordinary life into unforgettable spectacle. Work, entertainment, and social life, how the Romans spent their days. As the Roman baths slowly emptied and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city, life did not come to a halt. In many ways, it was only changing its rhythm. For millions of Romans, every day followed a familiar cycle. Work. Conversation. Business. Family. Entertainment. Religion. Sleep. Then it all began again with the next sunrise. To outsiders, ancient Rome is remembered for its emperors, magnificent temples, and victorious armies. But to the average citizen, life was far less dramatic. It revolved around earning a living, supporting a family, maintaining friendships, and finding moments of joy in one of the busiest cities the ancient world had ever known. The city that never stopped working. Rome depended on an enormous workforce. Every morning, tens of thousands of people left their homes with one simple goal: to earn enough money to survive. Unlike today, there were no office towers filled with computers. Instead, nearly every street functioned as a workplace. Blacksmiths hammered glowing iron into tools and weapons. Potters shaped wet clay into bowls, cups, and storage jars. Carpenters built doors, furniture, and carts. Stone masons carved marble statues that would decorate temples for centuries. Leather workers stitched sandals. Glassmakers crafted beautiful bottles from molten sand. Tailors repaired worn clothing. Jewelry makers worked patiently with gold and silver. Every neighborhood echoed with the sounds of labor. The smell of smoke drifted from workshops. Sparks flew through the air. Dust settled over the streets. The Roman economy was alive from dawn until sunset. The marketplace, Rome's beating heart. Perhaps nowhere felt more alive than the marketplace. The markets of Rome were chaotic, colorful, loud, and endlessly fascinating. Merchants displayed baskets overflowing with fresh figs, olives, grapes, onions, garlic, and fragrant herbs. Fish sellers shouted the freshness of their morning catch. Butchers carefully arranged cuts of pork and beef. Wine merchants invited customers to sample new vintages. Foreign traders offered exotic spices brought from Arabia and India. Silk from China. Amber from the Baltic. Ivory from Africa. Glass from Syria. Rome truly was the center of an international trading network. A shopper could purchase goods that had traveled thousands of miles before reaching the Eternal City. Negotiating prices became an art. Very few people accepted the first offer. Buyers and sellers argued politely, sometimes passionately. A skilled merchant knew how to flatter customers. A wise customer knew how to appear ready to walk away. This ritual happened thousands of times every single day. Every job had its place. Not everyone in Rome was wealthy. In fact, the overwhelming majority lived modest lives. Many worked with their hands. Builders constructed new roads, aqueducts, temples, and apartment buildings. Dockworkers unloaded grain ships arriving from Egypt. Millers ground wheat into flour. Bakers worked through the night to ensure fresh bread greeted the city each morning. Street cleaners removed waste from busy roads. Water carriers transported fresh water where it was needed. Even the mighty Roman Empire relied on ordinary workers performing ordinary jobs. Without them, Rome simply could not function. The role of slavery. No discussion of Roman daily life can ignore one difficult reality. Slavery existed everywhere. Enslaved people cleaned homes, prepared meals, raised children, worked in mines, served in shops, farmed enormous estates, copied books, managed finances. Some even became highly educated teachers, doctors, or secretaries. Others endured brutal conditions, especially in agriculture and mining. The experience of slavery varied greatly depending on one's owner and occupation. A household tutor might live relatively comfortably. A miner could face unimaginable hardship. It is important to remember that Roman society accepted slavery as normal. Very few questioned its existence. Millions of enslaved men, women, and children formed an essential part of the Roman economy. Their labor helped build the wealth that made Rome so powerful. Behind every magnificent palace and marble temple stood countless invisible hands. Women at work. Although Roman society remained largely dominated by men, women played an essential role in everyday life. Many managed households, raised children, oversaw servants, prepared clothing, handled family finances. In poorer families, women frequently worked outside the home as well. Some owned shops. Others sold goods in markets. Many became weavers, midwives, bakers, or innkeepers. Widows occasionally inherited successful businesses and managed them independently. While legal rights remained limited compared to modern standards, daily life often required women to make important economic decisions. Their contributions were impossible to ignore. Education, preparing the next generation. Not every child attended school. Poor families often needed children to begin working at an early age. But families who could afford education considered it an investment. A typical Roman school was simple. Students sat on wooden benches. There were no colorful classrooms. No digital screens. No printed textbooks. Children practiced writing on wooden tablets coated with wax. Using a pointed stylus, they scratched letters into the soft surface. Mistakes could be erased simply by smoothing the wax. Reading, writing, and arithmetic formed the foundation of education. As students grew older, they studied literature, history, philosophy, and public speaking. Oratory, the ability to speak persuasively before a crowd, was one of the most respected skills in Roman society. A talented speaker could become a lawyer, senator, or political leader. Many future emperors spent years mastering rhetoric before entering public life. Discipline in school was strict. Teachers expected obedience. Students who misbehaved often faced corporal punishment. Ancient writers mention canes and whips being used to enforce discipline. Learning was respected. But it was rarely gentle. The Roman love of conversation. Romans loved to talk. Politics filled daily conversation. So did business. Sports. Religion. Family matters. Military victories. Scandals. Rumors spread through the city with astonishing speed. Someone visiting the forum in the morning might hear about an event that had happened only hours earlier. Without newspapers or social media, information traveled through people. Public squares acted as giant communication networks. Every conversation carried news to someone else. Friends gathered beneath temple columns. Shopkeepers chatted with customers. Retired soldiers shared stories from distant provinces. Old men debated philosophy. Young politicians searched for influential supporters. Rome constantly talked to itself. Chariot racing, the greatest sport in Rome. If modern cities unite around football or basketball, Rome united around chariot racing. Nothing attracted larger crowds. The Circus Maximus could hold more than 150,000 spectators. Some historians believe the true number may have been even higher. Imagine standing among a crowd larger than many modern sports stadiums combined. The excitement was overwhelming. Teams raced under different colors. Blue. Green. Red. White. Fans passionately supported their favorites. Arguments over racing teams sometimes became so heated that they erupted into violence. Professional drivers became celebrities. Successful racers earned enormous fortunes. Some achieved fame across the entire empire. Children admired them. Adults bet heavily on races. Victories brought glory not only to drivers but also to the wealthy sponsors behind them. The thunder of horses charging around the track created an atmosphere unlike anything else in Roman life. Gladiators, heroes of the arena. No image of ancient Rome is more famous than the gladiator. Yet reality was more complex than popular movies often suggest. Gladiators were highly trained athletes. Many belonged to specialized schools where instructors spent years teaching different fighting styles. Some carried heavy shields and short swords. Others fought with nets and tridents. Each type of gladiator had unique strengths and weaknesses. Matches were carefully organized to create dramatic contests. The crowd reacted to every strike. Every dodge. Every fall. Victory brought fame. Successful gladiators became household names. Women admired them. Children collected small figures depicting famous fighters. Graffiti praising favorite gladiators appeared throughout Roman cities. Although death could occur, not every fight ended with someone being killed. Training skilled gladiators required significant expense. Owners often preferred to preserve experienced fighters rather than lose valuable investments. The arena represented entertainment, courage, discipline, and spectacle all at once. Gambling, Rome's favorite vice. Romans loved games of chance. Dice appeared almost everywhere. Soldiers played during military campaigns. Merchants gambled after work. Friends gathered in taverns hoping for good fortune. Officially, gambling laws existed. In practice, they were often ignored. People wagered coins, jewelry, clothing, even personal possessions. Some won fortunes. Others lost everything. Human nature has changed remarkably little over 2,000 years. The thrill of risk fascinated Romans just as it fascinates people today. Festivals, days of joy. Not every day was devoted to work. Rome celebrated numerous public festivals throughout the year. Religious ceremonies filled temples. Processions marched through decorated streets. Musicians performed. Actors entertained crowds. Food vendors sold special treats. Children played games. Public holidays allowed ordinary citizens to escape daily routines. For a brief moment, the city's endless work paused. Communities celebrated together. These festivals strengthened loyalty not only to the gods but also to Rome itself. Shared celebrations reminded people that they belonged to something greater than their individual lives. Evenings at home. As darkness settled across the city, most Romans returned home. Families gathered for the evening meal. Children listened to stories told by parents or grandparents. Oil lamps cast a warm golden glow across simple rooms. Some households played board games using carved wooden pieces. Others sang songs. Neighbors visited. Friends exchanged gossip. In wealthier homes, guests lingered long after dinner. Wine continued flowing. Poets recited verses. Musicians entertained the room. Political discussion stretched late into the night. Meanwhile, outside, Rome remained noisy. Dogs barked. Carts rolled through narrow streets. Voices echoed between apartment buildings. Some taverns stayed open. Night watchmen patrolled dark alleys carrying lanterns. Despite the late hour, the city never truly fell silent. For the Romans, work and entertainment existed side by side. A hard day's labor deserved relaxation. Friendship. Competition. Conversation. Laughter. Yet beneath these familiar routines were customs that modern people would find deeply surprising. Some habits seem practical. Others seem bizarre. And a few are so strange that they continue to astonish historians even today. In the final part of our journey, we'll explore the everyday Roman customs that would leave most modern visitors completely speechless, from using urine as a cleaning product to sharing public toilets, worshipping household spirits, fearing unlucky birds, and many other remarkable traditions that reveal just how different life in ancient Rome truly was. The strangest habits of the ancient Romans, customs that would shock the modern world. The Roman Empire was, in many ways, astonishingly modern. Its engineers built aqueducts that carried fresh water for miles. Its roads connected 3 continents. Its legal system influenced laws that still exist today. Its cities contained apartment buildings, public parks, libraries, shopping districts, restaurants, and entertainment venues that would feel surprisingly familiar to a modern visitor. Yet beneath that familiar surface existed a world filled with customs that would leave most of us completely speechless. Many of the habits Romans considered perfectly ordinary would seem strange, uncomfortable, or even unbelievable today. But these customs were not signs of a primitive civilization. They reflected a society that simply understood the world differently. To truly appreciate ancient Rome, we must see the world through Roman eyes. They used urine as a cleaning product. Few facts surprise modern audiences more than this one. The Romans collected human urine. Public containers were sometimes placed along busy streets so people could relieve themselves. The collected urine was then sold. Not because anyone wanted to drink it. Because it was valuable. As urine ages, it produces ammonia, a powerful natural cleaning agent. Roman laundries, known as phalanakae, relied heavily on it. Workers poured diluted urine into large stone vats filled with dirty clothing. Then came perhaps the least glamorous job in ancient Rome. People climbed into the vats and stomped on the clothes with their bare feet. Hour after hour. The combination of pressure and ammonia removed grease, sweat, and stains remarkably well. Afterward, garments were thoroughly rinsed and dried before being returned to their owners. It sounds disgusting today. Yet chemically, the method was surprisingly effective. The practice became so common that Emperor Vespasian eventually imposed a tax on urine collection. When his son Titus criticized the unusual tax, Vespasian reportedly held up a coin and asked whether it smelled unpleasant. When Titus answered no, the emperor famously replied, "Money has no smell." The phrase survives nearly 2,000 years later. Public toilets were social places. Imagine walking into a public restroom. Instead of private stalls, you find a long marble bench. 20 people are already sitting there. Talking. Laughing. Discussing politics. Nobody seems embarrassed. This was perfectly normal in ancient Rome. Public latrines often served dozens of users at once. Running water constantly flowed beneath the seats, carrying waste away through underground sewers. Visitors sat shoulder to shoulder with friends, neighbors, and strangers. Privacy was almost non-existent. Many historians believe conversations held in public toilets were as lively as those in bathhouses. Business deals could begin there. Political rumors spread there. Neighbors exchanged news there. To the Romans, the restroom was simply another public gathering place. Every home had invisible protectors. Religion surrounded nearly every moment of Roman life. Before leaving home, many families paused before a small household shrine called the Lararium. Inside stood small statues representing protective spirits known as the Lares and Penates. These were not distant gods ruling the heavens. They were guardians of everyday life. Families believed these spirits protected the house itself. Each morning or evening they might leave offerings. A small piece of bread. Fresh fruit. Flowers. Wine. Incense. Sometimes nothing more than a whispered prayer. Children grew up believing these invisible guardians watched over them every day. The Roman home was therefore both a living space and a sacred place. Superstition was everywhere. Romans paid close attention to signs. A bird flying overhead. An unexpected thunderstorm. A strange dream. An animal behaving unusually. None of these events were dismissed as coincidence. They might contain messages from the gods. Special religious officials called augurs interpreted the flight patterns of birds before important political decisions or military campaigns. If the signs appeared unfavorable, an entire event might be postponed. Even successful generals hesitated to ignore bad omens. Ordinary citizens behaved similarly. Many avoided beginning important journeys on unlucky days. Others carried small charms believed to protect against the evil eye. Parents often hung protective amulets around the necks of young children. Life felt uncertain. Disease. War. Fire. Accidents. Without modern science, superstition helped explain an unpredictable world. The danger of fire. One of Rome's greatest fears was fire. Most apartment buildings contained wooden floors and beams. Oil lamps burned every evening. Cooking fires remained active throughout the day. The streets were narrow. Buildings stood close together. Once flames appeared, they spread with terrifying speed. The Great Fire during Nero's reign became the most famous disaster, but smaller fires occurred regularly. Many Romans went to sleep wondering whether they would wake to smoke filling their homes. Night watchmen patrolled the city. Firefighting units called the vigiles remained ready to respond. Yet despite their efforts, entire neighborhoods could disappear in a single night. For ordinary Romans, fire was not a distant possibility. It was an everyday fear. Clothing revealed everything. Modern fashion often reflects personal taste. Roman clothing immediately revealed social identity. The famous toga was not everyday clothing. It was heavy, bulky, difficult to wear. Reserved primarily for male Roman citizens during formal occasions. Laborers rarely worked while wearing togas. Instead, most people preferred the much more practical tunic. Color also carried meaning. Bright purple dye, extracted from tiny Mediterranean sea snails, became extraordinarily expensive. Producing even a small amount required thousands of shells. As a result, certain shades of purple became symbols of immense wealth and eventually imperial authority. To wear imperial purple without permission could become a serious offense. Simply seeing someone dressed in that color immediately communicated extraordinary status. Children became adults quickly. Roman childhood looked very different from modern childhood. Many boys began helping their fathers while still very young. Girls learned household skills from their mothers. Children in poorer families often entered the workforce long before reaching adulthood. Play certainly existed. Archaeologists have discovered dolls, toy animals, dice, and small gaming pieces. Children laughed. Ran through streets. Invented games. Just as children do today. Yet life expected maturity much earlier. Responsibility arrived quickly. Family survival often depended upon everyone's contribution.